The preliminary investigation report of Air India Flight AI171 has revealed some shocking findings, creating a new mystery in the aviation world. Just seconds before the crash, who switched the fuel switches of both engines from run to cutoff? When the engine stalled after the fuel was cut, one pilot asked why it happened. The other pilot replied, "I didn't do it." Why were the fuel switches of both engines turned off at such a critical moment during takeoff? Was there a technical fault? Did the pilot do it intentionally? Or was it a malfunction? There have been other incidents in history where pilots deliberately cause crashes. Are there any similarities between those cases and AI171? Today, we will dive deep to try to understand this issue. Welcome back to Nexus of Knowledge videos. On the morning of June 12, 2025, at Ahmedabad International Airport, it was a routine day. The air was slightly warm and the sky was clear. Some planes were boarding passengers at the terminal, while others were taxiing. Every 5 minutes, planes were either landing or taking off. Among them was Air India's Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, tail number VTNB, flight AI171. This plane had arrived in Ahmedabad from Delhi just 2 hours earlier and was now ready to fly to London. Nobody knew that in just a few moments, this Dreamliner would make headlines worldwide and leave a lasting mystery in aviation history. In the cockpit was 56-year-old Captain Sumit Sabharwal. Captain Sumit Sabharwal had a total flying experience of 15,600 hours, including 8,200 hours on this Boeing 787. The co-pilot, also called the first officer, was 32-year-old Clive Kinder. He had 3,400 hours of total flying experience, with 1,128 hours on the Boeing 787. The report says both pilots passed the breath analyzer test about an hour before the flight and were perfectly fit to fly. The same aircraft, VTNB, had earlier operated flight AI-423 from Delhi to Ahmedabad. During that flight, there was a minor technical issue, which the maintenance engineer resolved. The plane was now fully ready for its next journey. Flight AI-171 was carrying 230 passengers. The investigation report noted that the aircraft had 54,200 kilograms of fuel, and its takeoff weight was 213,400 kilograms, which is well within the normal range for a Boeing 787. There was no evidence of dangerous cargo on board. Everything was normal. After boarding, air traffic control recordings show that at 1:13 p.m., the aircraft requested pushback and startup clearance from the terminal. At 1:13:45 p.m., ATC instructed the plane to line up on runway 23. The wind speed was 6 knots, around 11 kilometers per hour. The weather was clear, and visibility was 6,000 meters. Everything was perfect for a normal takeoff. After getting clearance, at 1:37:37 p.m., the pilot pushed the thrust levers, and the aircraft started accelerating. On this flight, First Officer Clive Kinder was handling the takeoff, while Captain Sumit Sabharwal was monitoring. According to the enhanced flight recorder data, at 1:38:33 p.m., the aircraft reached V1 speed, 153 knots, 283 kilometers per hour. After this speed, aborting the takeoff is not possible. 2 seconds later, the aircraft reached VR speed, 155 knots, and at 1:38:39 p.m., it lifted off. Up to this point, everything was normal. CCTV footage also shows that takeoff looked completely normal. But what happened next changed everything. About 3 seconds after liftoff, the aircraft reached 180 knots, meaning the engines were still producing full thrust. Then, the enhanced flight recorder revealed something shocking. Within just 1 second, the fuel cutoff switches for both engines were flipped from run to cutoff. This immediately stopped fuel supply, and the N1 and N2 values of the engines dropped rapidly. The thrust started falling fast. The cockpit voice recorder captured a pilot asking, "Why did you cut the fuel switches?" The other replied, "I didn't do it." The investigation team still hasn't confirmed which pilot asked the question and which one answered. CCTV footage shows that immediately after liftoff, the ram air turbine, or RAT, deployed. The RAT is an emergency power source that automatically activates if the engines fail. It provides power to the aircraft's main electrical systems. The deployment of the RAT indicated that something unusual had happened on the plane. Footage also showed the aircraft losing altitude rapidly. Enhanced Flight Recorder, EFR, data confirmed this, as the N2 values of both engines dropped below their minimum idle speeds. At 1:39:05 p.m., ATC recordings captured the plane sending a distress signal. When ATC called for a response, there was no reply. The aircraft was seen crashing beyond the airport boundary. An emergency response was immediately activated. The plane first hit a chimney of an Army Medical Corps building about 1,600 meters straight from runway 23, and then it struck the BJ Medical College hostel. Debris from the crash spread roughly 1,000 feet long and 400 feet wide. All 12 crew members and 229 passengers on board lost their lives. On the ground, 19 people also died. Only one passenger survived, sitting near an emergency exit. The 15-page preliminary investigation report details everything carefully. For example, the flap handle assembly was found in a 5 degrees flap position, which is normal for takeoff. This was also confirmed by EFR data. The landing gear lever was found in the down position, and although the thrust lever was heavily burned, it remained in the forward position until the crash. Most importantly, the fuel control switches were found in the run position. This means the pilots had turned the fuel switches back on before the crash. These fuel switches are designed so that only a human can operate them. Each switch has a locking mechanism on both left and right sides to prevent accidental on or off movement. To operate the switch, a pilot must use both hands. One hand pushes the lock, and the other moves the switch up or down. This is the most shocking part. It's impossible to turn these switches on or off with just one hand. So, if the cockpit voice recorder shows the pilots did not turn off the switches, then who did? And if it happened accidentally, how could both switches turn off one after the other by mistake? The investigation report found that the two fuel switches were turned off within 1 second of each other, which looks like a deliberate human action. Later, the switches were turned back on, but by then it was too late. According to the report, there was a gap of about 10 seconds between fuel cutoff and resupply for engine 1, and about 14 seconds for engine 2. Evidence shows that both engines had started producing thrust again, but the crash occurred at that moment. The biggest mystery now is, why did Flight AI171 experience such a sequence with the fuel switches? Everything about Flight AI171 was perfect up to takeoff. From the engines to the fuel loaded, everything was normal. The investigation team even tested fuel samples from the tanker that refueled AI171 and found nothing wrong. So if everything was fine, why were the fuel switches deliberately turned off? Or could there have been a fault in the locking mechanism? The report mentions another important point. In 2018, the FAA issued a special airworthiness information bulletin. It warned about the possibility of the fuel control switch locking feature failing. This means the aviation industry was already aware that fuel switch locks could potentially fail. This bulletin, also called a SAIB, was issued after complaints from Boeing 737 operators, meaning this issue had been reported before on some Boeing aircraft. The fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is similar across different Boeing models, including part number 4TL8373D. The same part installed on AI171's aircraft VTNB. 7 years ago, the FAA had warned that some fuel control switches were installed in a disengaged lock state. Air India skipped this inspection because it wasn't mandatory, it was just advisory. But even if we assume that AI171's fuel switch locking mechanism was faulty, how could both switches accidentally turn off at the same time during takeoff? The fuel switches of AI171 turned off one after the other within a second. If the pilots had done it deliberately, there could only be one reason: suicide. But was it really a suicide? There have been similar cases in history. 2015 Germanwings Flight 9525 The co-pilot locked the captain out of the cockpit while he went to the bathroom and deliberately crashed the plane into the Alps. His mental health records later showed prior issues. 2013 LAM Mozambique Flight 470. The captain manually set the autopilot to 0 feet while the first officer was out of the cockpit, intentionally causing the crash. 1999 EgyptAir Flight 990. Religious phrases were heard in the cockpit before the plane nosedived. The Egyptian government blamed a mechanical failure, while the FAA considered it a suicide mission. 1997 SilkAir Flight 185. The pilot manually turned off the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, then intentionally crashed the aircraft. One common factor in these suicide missions was that the pilots did not respond to ATC. In the case of Air India 171, however, it does not appear to be a suicide, at least according to the current investigation. Here's why. 1. The pilots turned the fuel switches back on at one point. If it were intentional, they would not have done that. 2. They were responsive and, just 2 seconds before the crash, sent a distress signal to ATC. 3. Seconds before impact, the aircraft's nose was seen rising, which the flight data confirmed. This shows they were hoping the engines would regain thrust and the plane might climb again. If this had been deliberate, there would have been no reason to keep the elevators in takeoff position. What's your opinion on this? Let me know in the comments. We hope you like and share this Nexus of Knowledge video. See you in the next exciting video.